In a land of rapid-fire headlines, here's the news you can actually use. I'm Jenna, and this is Smarter News. Well, we have replaced a 24-hour news cycle with a news cycle that is based on infinity. It just can go on and on and on. We've been in a breaking news environment really for the last several weeks, maybe even longer. And just for perspective, in my 20 years as a journalist, this is a uniquely busy time, undoubtedly. It's not just the amount of news, it's the variety of topics that require your brain to do acrobatic shifting from one to the next, from a potential deal with Ukraine on rare earth minerals to potential news on one of the most mysterious and dark cases about human trafficking and abuse in a long time, the announced release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. A few thoughts that might be helpful on how to save your sanity during this time from a journalist perspective. One of the things I'm really trying to do is be more cognizant of news that happens spontaneously versus news that is produced. For example, a sudden mid-air collision is news. No one expected it at that moment, and it required reporting. On the opposite end of the spectrum, news can also be produced. The Attorney General, for example, announced she was going to release these files for the Jeffrey Epstein case on Thursday. We're still waiting for those files, by the way, at the time of this recording. If we get these files, or even if we don't, this story requires reporting too. We just have a heads up on it. Often news happens in a gray area where there's a combination of planned and spontaneous. For example, when two world leaders sit down at a planned meeting, but answer open-ended, unexpected questions from the press, as President Trump and the UK Prime Minister Starmer just did today. In all of these cases, there can be news that really matters to you. Just because news is planned doesn't mean it's not important. You just have to be aware of the source and remain curious about the timing. Why now? What we've seen from the White House in the last several weeks is not just produced news, for example, executive orders being signed each and every day, but also spontaneous news. So there's a lot to balance. And what I want to do here at Smarter News is pull out what's most interesting to you, most newsworthy in your life in that moment. And with the flood of information, what is said versus what is actually done is important to watch for. Again, it's a very challenging environment, but we only have so much time in the day. And I'm sharing this because I'd love to chase down any and all of these stories that are being talked about on a regular basis, but being cluttered and rushed does not produce clarity and context in reporting. And maybe I need to hear that as well as share it with you, because really, again, we could just stay online 24 hours a day and still not have enough time to go through a lot of the stories that are out there. So I wanted at the end of this week to just summarize a few key headlines that actually build off stories from the last few weeks. For example, earlier this week, we saw some new data that showed a deep drop in consumer confidence when it comes to the economy. One of the reasons for that is higher prices. And one item that has skyrocketed in price is the price of a dozen eggs. And it's now become sort of like the new gas price. People are tracking it and noticing it, and it's not coming down. And we've Easter around the corner, so we expect prices to go up. So that's all happening in the background. This week, though, we got a new response from the administration. The Secretary of Agriculture put out a plan on how to combat these higher egg prices. And she published this plan in the Wall Street Journal. She also spoke about it to the press. So yes, prepared remarks, but responding to a very real story. Here's some of what she said.
So just this morning, we announced the plan to, first of all, attack the avian flu and how we pull it back out of our poultry producers. But secondly, how we bring the cost of eggs down. So USDA will be producing at no charge an audit to every single egg farmer in this country, and then we will help them secure their barns. Secondly, we're going to work to move much more quickly on repopulating the 160 million birds that have been culled in just the last few months. We're looking to import eggs in the short term. This is just on the cost piece. We're already in discussions. There's been, if you dig around, you'll kind of figure out which countries, but we're talking to 3 or 4 countries right now about getting between 70 and 100 million eggs into the country in the next month or two, which of course will help with supply and demand. And then the final, more long term, is putting significant funds into vaccine and therapeutic research.
The time horizon she provided for change is by this summer, the next several months. So let's see what happens. In the meantime, here's another cause and effect story. Last week, President Trump criticized Ukrainian President Zelensky, and now President Trump is expecting President Zelensky at the White House for a potential deal on rare earth minerals. Here's what President Trump said with a press availability with the UK Prime Minister on Thursday.
Well, so President Zelensky is coming to see me on Friday morning. And we're going to be signing really a very important agreement for both sides because it's really going to get us into that country. We'll be working there. We'll have a lot of people working there. And so in that sense, it's very good. It's a backstop, you could say. I don't think anybody's going to play around if we're there with a lot of workers and having to do with rare earths and other things, which we need for our country.
I just recorded a short report on rare earths, so check it out if you haven't. Word to the wise, though, any deal that's announced is not a guarantee of peace, so the details here will really matter when we see them. But this is something new. This proposal of some sort of economic partnership between the United States and Ukraine is new. We haven't really heard about that until the last few weeks, so this is something to watch. Finally, speaking of watching, I watched the president's cabinet meeting in full, his first full cabinet meeting, a prepared event that the press gathered for. But here's what stood out most to me from this event. First and foremost, the whole meeting was broadcast. Usually you just get a short media availability, like a couple minutes, and then they close the doors on you. But in this case, the media hung out for about an hour. The second thing that stood out about this cabinet meeting is that it actually opened in prayer. I've never seen that before. Also, the cabinet meeting started with a person who is not technically a cabinet member and does not have a cabinet position, Elon Musk, who actually said something about technology that does bring up questions about efficiency that maybe Republican and Democrats can agree on.
Thank you, Mr. President. I actually just call myself a humble tech support here because this is actually, as crazy as it sounds, that is almost a literal description of the work that the Doge team is doing, is helping fix the government computer systems. Many of these systems are extremely old. They don't communicate. There are a lot of mistakes in the systems. The software doesn't work. So we are actually tech support. It's ironic, but it's true.
But it was this question for Secretary of Health Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that sparked some more questions for me. A reporter asked about the measles outbreak we've been covering in Texas, and this outbreak has led to a death of a child. Here's what the secretary said.
We are following the measles epidemic every day. I think there's 124 people who have contracted measles at this point, mainly in Gaines County, Texas. Mainly, we're told, in the Mennonite community. There are 2 people who have died, but we're watching it, and there are about 20 people hospitalized, mainly for quarantine. We're watching it. We put out a post on it yesterday, and we're going to continue to follow it. Incidentally, there have been 4 measles outbreaks this year in this country. Last year, there were 16. So it's not unusual. We have measles outbreaks every year.
Now, there were 16 outbreaks of measles last year in the United States, but just a reminder, an outbreak in this tracking is a group of more than 3 cases. In 2024, the CDC recorded 285 cases. In this one outbreak in Texas, we're seeing a reported 124 cases alone. So it's a big cluster of cases. So 2 things can be true. We do have measles outbreaks every year in America. That's a fact. It's also true that this outbreak that we're watching right now is larger than others we've seen in recent years. So again, something to keep an eye on. We have a lot of developing stories. If we get a huge file of information, for example, on Jeffrey Epstein or any other story, know I'm always looking at the news. And while we may not be first, we're going to be really, really intentional about what we're delivering and why. So you're not just endlessly scrolling into infinity forever and ever. We want to free up your time so you can live your own great American story. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a primer for this week and a look ahead to this weekend. Thank you for your support of quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news.